Yeah, so this is also something that changes from like parenting little kids to parenting older kids. And it's like possibly more important when parenting older kids because they're a little bit more aware of every part of your reaction. Younger kids, maybe your facial expression can be in shock, but you can get yourself together, but your teen is going to notice that like shocked face. So we're constantly being like input, taking in a lot of input. And if we have little kids, our kids are, like just getting my younger daughter dressed in the morning sometimes is extremely challenging. And she wears a school uniform, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal. But it's like she throws herself on the floor because her sock is itchy or whatever it is. And when I'm in a hurry and my other daughter needs my help and my puppy is whining, like my unplanned out reaction is like anger and frustration that she's slowing me down and doing this. And that's not what I want, how I want her to start her day, with me getting angry and frustrated with her. And so again, like part of it is that I've already taken time to connect with myself in the morning. So I'm like, oh, Stella, like, how can I support you right now? Do you need a new pair of socks? So it's really like, again, it's that space. And sometimes it's child throws herself on the floor. I feel that initial heat start to rise and frustration. And then I just like take a deep breath, let it out, and ask what she needs. A really important thing with reactions is to take a breath and to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
Because our initial response maybe, or like with an older kid, like they're like, can I go to a concert with such and such? And you're like, of course not. Like, are you crazy? That's your first reaction. I was a crazy teen. So the things that I like schemed to try to do, I'm like, I can't believe I even I can't believe I even asked that question, but is like, take a deep breath, let it out, try to control your facial expression and ask a question. Like, and it could just be a purely informational question, like, what about your socks is itchy? Or if like you can't think of anything because you're so frustrated, like, tell me more about that.
Mm-hmm.
Something really simple, so that asking a question gives you time to, it kind of puts the ball back in their court, and it gives you some time to like take a couple breaths and get yourself together.
Mm-hmm. I love that because then it's not your initial reaction, because I think a lot of times we react before we actually absorb the information or just give it our first instant without actually being like, wait, it's not as big of a deal as we're making it, or it's this will pass in like a couple minutes or what have you, because I think if we just work off reaction, it's just going to turn into a big mess.
Yeah, totally. And like sometimes getting clarity on it is important. Like, I mean, if we're with the sock example, like she throws herself on the floor, she doesn't say like my socks are itchy. She's just like, I can't wear these socks, they're terrible, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, ah. And if I say like, if I get mad at her and then we get into an argument, that can happen. Or if I'm like, oh, what's going on with your socks? And she's like, they're so itchy. I'm like, oh, like I would hate to wear itchy socks. Let's take them off and get a new pair.
Hmm.
And so it's like, it's important to get more information before we just, because yeah, like oftentimes our first reaction is not based on whatever the other person is really going through.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that, asking a question too, because then I think it also allows time for the child to understand what they're feeling as well. Because, if they're just so frustrated, and then if they say out loud, like, oh, my sock is itchy, maybe they're like, oh, it's actually, to like kind of hear it out loud, it's like, oh, I can take these off, or I'll find other socks, or, you know, like, oh, mom's here to help me, not like get mad at me. I think that's a really great point of just kind of stepping back, asking them the question, and then they're able to kind of like address their own situation. I think, and then learn how to, react in the future as well.
Totally. It gives them some agency over themselves and like shows them that you're not just like the puppet master who's like, I will tell you what socks to wear, I will do this. They're like, oh, like what is going on? Like, or with an older kid, like, oh yeah, like this, now that I'm like explaining to you why I should get to do this, maybe I don't really think that it's the best idea, or maybe I can at least see why you don't think it's the best idea.
Mhm.
And then another thing that's super important is just like practicing it on little things like socks, so that when bigger things come along, you're practiced in this calmer reaction and asking a question or adding a little space, because sometimes there's going to be things that are really big and that maybe you do need to be a little bit more serious or stern in. And if you're constantly reacting with no, like you can't do that, or what's going on, what's wrong with you, it's going to like, it's just going to be a lot stickier. Whereas if your usual response is a little bit more open, if sometimes you have a reaction that's a little bit more closed, it will give you more room to apologize and connect about it, your not so good reaction, versus if you're always reacting, it's just going to be like a constant kind of blow up.